The impact threw Ethan Graves against his harness with such force that consciousness flickered like a dying light. Through the fractured viewscreen of his scout vessel, the crimson sky of exoplanet HD 209458b swirled above, a world officially classified as terminal phase by the Galactic Survey. No one was supposed to be here. Nothing should be alive here. Yet something had pulled him from his designated route, a distress signal impossibly broadcasting from a planet in its death throes. Ethan's fingers trembled as he disengaged the harness, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through his ribs. Blood trickled from a gash above his eye, temporarily blinding him. The ship's systems were dead, save for the emergency beacon. If it worked, rescue was still days away. The atmosphere outside was technically breathable, though laden with particulates from the planet's ongoing breakdown. Ethan sealed his exosuit, grabbed his survival pack, and forced open the emergency hatch. The landscape stretched before him like an artist's nightmare, twisted rock formations jutted from cracked, rust-colored soil. In the distance, mountains crumbled in slow motion as the planet's core destabilized. The science was clear: this world had months, perhaps weeks before catastrophic collapse. "Hello?" Ethan called, immediately regretting breaking the eerie silence. If something had sent that signal, something else might be listening. He activated his scanner, sweeping for life signs. Nothing. Then, a flicker. Organic. Bipedal. Moving toward him. Ethan drew his pulse pistol, thumb hovering over the safety. "Identify yourself." She emerged from behind a rock formation, humanoid but unmistakably alien. Tall and lithe, her skin shimmered with a faint bioluminescence, transitioning from deep violet to azure as she moved. Where a human would have hair, delicate tendrils moved independently, as if sensing the air. Her eyes, entirely silver without pupil or iris, fixed on him. No protective gear. How was she breathing? The alien approached slowly, hands raised in what seemed like a universal gesture of peace. Ethan kept his weapon ready but lowered it slightly. "Can you understand me?" No response. The alien tilted her head, the tendrils around her face swaying in curious patterns. "I'm Ethan Graves, Galactic Survey Corps. My ship crashed. Are you the source of the distress signal?" Again, no verbal response. Instead, she reached toward him. Ethan stepped back instinctively, but she persisted, hand extended. "I don't know what you want," he said, grip tightening on his weapon. The alien's expression changed: impatience? Frustration? She motioned urgently at the horizon, then back to Ethan, then made a slashing motion across her throat. A warning? A distant howl shattered the silence, echoing across the dying landscape. The alien's skin pulsed rapidly, bioluminescence intensifying in what Ethan instantly recognized as fear. She grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a crevice in the nearby rock formation. The howl came again, closer. Making a split-second decision, Ethan allowed himself to be led. The moment their skin made contact, her hand on his exposed wrist where the exosuit ended, a jolt of sensation rushed through him. Not pain, but understanding. Danger. Hide. Now. Inside the narrow fissure, they pressed against the wall as something large moved past their hiding place. The alien's hand remained firmly wrapped around Ethan's wrist, and somehow he knew her name, Zyra. Not through words, but through the strange connection where they touched. As darkness fell, they remained hidden, the creature prowling nearby. Zyra's skin glowed softly, illuminating their shelter. Her fingers traced patterns on his palm, and somehow, Ethan understood she was trying to tell him something crucial. This was just the beginning. They were both stranded. They were both hunted. And neither would survive alone. The crimson dawn broke over the dying planet, casting long shadows through the crevice where Ethan and Zyra had spent the night. Ethan's muscles ached from maintaining his position, pressed against the cold stone as the unknown predator had prowled outside for hours. Only when the howling faded into the distance had he allowed himself to drift into a fitful sleep, Zyra's hand still clasping his wrist. As consciousness returned, Ethan became acutely aware of the alien woman beside him. During the night, her bioluminescence had dimmed to a soft glow, just enough to outline her slender form. Her silver eyes were closed, tendrils relaxed around her face, her breathing slow and measured. She looked almost peaceful, despite their dire circumstances. Ethan carefully withdrew his hand from her grip, immediately feeling the loss of that strange connection. He needed to think clearly, to assess their situation without the disorienting sensation of her emotions flowing into him. The movement woke her. Zyra's eyes snapped open, and she reached for him with an urgency that startled him. When he hesitated, her expression shifted to something he recognized as frustration. She pointed outside, then to the horizon, then made a walking motion with her fingers. "You want us to leave?" Ethan asked, knowing she couldn't understand his words. Zyra took his hand again, and the jolt of connection returned. Images flooded his mind, a distant mountain range, a cave entrance, safety. Somehow, she was sharing memories, impressions, a destination. "You have shelter," Ethan realized. "That's where we need to go." She squeezed his hand in what felt like affirmation. Ethan checked his supplies, 3 days of emergency rations, a water purifier, his pulse pistol with 2 charge cells, and basic medical supplies. Not much, but it would have to do. He offered Zyra a protein bar, which she examined curiously before mimicking his eating motions. As they prepared to leave their hiding place, Ethan found himself studying Zyra more intently. Her physiology was humanoid, yet distinctly alien, the shimmering skin that seemed to reflect her emotional state, the graceful tendrils that moved independently around her face, sensing the environment. Most puzzling was her ability to breathe the toxic atmosphere without protection. "How are you surviving here?" he asked, tapping his exosuit's respirator and then gesturing to her exposed skin. Zyra placed her palm against his chest. The sensation was different this time, not images or emotions, but a deeper understanding. Her species had adapted to harsh environments, their skin filtering toxins, their lungs processing gases that would kill a human. This dying world was still within her tolerance, though barely. They emerged cautiously from the crevice, Ethan scanning for threats while Zyra's tendrils swayed, sensing the air currents. She tugged his arm, pointing to distant rock formations. The mountain range from her mental image was barely visible on the horizon, at least a day's journey across open terrain. Their progress was slow, each step taken with caution. The landscape grew increasingly unstable, fissures opening in the ground as the planet's core continued its collapse. Twice they changed course to avoid wide chasms that hadn't existed the day before. By midday, a hazy sun hung overhead, and Ethan's suit reported rising temperatures and radiation levels. Zyra showed no discomfort, but her skin had dulled from its vibrant hues to a muted blue-gray. When they paused for Ethan to drink from his water supply, she placed her hand on his forearm, and he felt her fatigue. "You're not as adapted to this as you let on," he said, offering her water. She drank gratefully, her fingers brushing his as she returned the container. The brief contact conveyed gratitude, but also concern. She pointed to his scanner, then to the sky. Ethan activated the device, scanning for atmospheric anomalies. "Shit," he muttered as the readings appeared. A massive storm was forming, the planet's deteriorating atmosphere creating a toxic cyclone that would overtake them within hours. Zyra's hand found his, and again came that flood of images, a closer shelter, a series of caves in the rock formations ahead. Not their final destination, but enough to weather the coming storm. They increased their pace, Ethan's breathing growing labored inside his suit as they climbed a steep incline. At the summit, Zyra suddenly froze, her skin pulsing with rapid flashes of warning color. She pulled Ethan down behind a boulder, her grip on his wrist almost painful. In the valley below, something moved, a massive creature with a segmented exoskeleton, multiple limbs ending in wicked claws, and a sensor array where a head should be. It prowled methodically, sweeping the area, clearly hunting. "That's what was tracking us," Ethan whispered unnecessarily. Zyra's touch conveyed confirmation, along with something else, recognition. She knew this creature, feared it. Her species and this predator had history. They remained motionless until the creature moved on, disappearing into a ravine. Only then did they continue toward the caves, moving more cautiously than before. As the first acid raindrops began to fall, stinging even through Ethan's protective suit, they reached the cave entrance. Inside, Zyra's bioluminescence provided their only light, casting eerie shadows on stone walls covered with strange, swirling patterns that Ethan recognized as deliberate markings. "Your people were here before," he said, tracing the patterns with his fingers. Zyra placed both hands on his face, the most intimate contact they'd shared. The rush of information was overwhelming. Her people, peaceful explorers who had studied this world before its decline, communicating through touch, creating art through shared emotional impressions left on tactile sensitive surfaces. And then came the hunters, drawn to their psychic energy, killing most of her expedition. She was the last, sending the distress signal that had drawn Ethan's ship off course. The revelation left Ethan breathless. "You called me here," he said, not accusingly but with dawning understanding. Her hand still framing his face, Zyra's silver eyes met his. The emotion that flowed between them couldn't be mistaken, regret for endangering him, gratitude for his presence, and something more complex developing between them. A connection neither had anticipated but both now relied upon. Outside, the storm intensified, sealing them in their temporary sanctuary. As the toxic rain pounded the planet's surface, Ethan and Zyra sat facing each other in the dim blue glow of her bioluminescence, hands linked, developing a language without words that would become their only hope for survival. 3 days in the cave system had changed everything between Ethan and Zyra. As the toxic storm raged outside, they had developed a rudimentary language built on touch, her palm against his conveying complex concepts, his fingertips tracing patterns on her luminescent skin returning simpler responses. Each contact deepened their connection, neural pathways forming between species never meant to communicate. When the storm finally subsided, they emerged into a transformed landscape. Entire formations had collapsed, new fissures scarred the terrain, and the crimson sky had darkened to an ominous purple. Ethan's scanner showed accelerated planetary decay. They had less time than he'd initially calculated. "The mountain shelter," Ethan said, pointing to the distant peaks still standing against the apocalyptic sky. "Can we reach it before nightfall?" Zyra's fingers brushed his temple, conveying determination and a route through the new terrain. Their destination was a research outpost her people had established, stocked with supplies and communication equipment. If anything could boost his emergency beacon, it would be there. They moved swiftly, no longer strangers navigating unfamiliar territory but partners anticipating each other's movements. Zyra sensed environmental dangers before Ethan's instruments detected them. Ethan's tactical training helped them avoid exposed positions where predators might spot them. By midday, they'd covered half the distance to the mountains. Ethan's suit reported depleting oxygen filters. Soon he would have to risk breathing the thin, toxic atmosphere. Zyra sensed his concern and stopped at a shallow pool of iridescent liquid. Her touch explained, this fluid could temporarily enhance his respiratory system if applied correctly. Trusting her completely now, Ethan removed his helmet. The air burned his lungs, but Zyra quickly dipped her fingers in the pool and traced them across his lips, down his throat. The effect was immediate, cooling relief spread through his chest, and breathing became easier. Their eyes met in silent understanding. Survival now required absolute trust. They continued onwards, but as they entered a narrow pass between collapsed rock formations, Zyra suddenly froze. Her skin pulsed warning colors, tendrils rigid with tension. Ethan didn't need touch to understand, danger. The predator burst from behind a boulder, its segmented body larger than Ethan remembered, sensor array pulsing with hungry energy. It moved with terrifying speed, multiple limbs propelling it directly toward Zyra. Without hesitation, Ethan threw himself between them, firing his pulse pistol. Energy blasts struck the creature's exoskeleton, scorching but not penetrating. The impact knocked it sideways, giving them seconds to run. They fled deeper into the pass, the predator in pursuit. Ethan's lungs burned despite Zyra's treatment, each breath becoming labored. They wouldn't outrun it. Zyra pulled him behind an outcropping, her hands frantically communicating a plan. The creature hunted by sensing neural patterns, particularly drawn to her species' psychic emanations. If they could overload its sensory array. Understanding dawned. Ethan nodded, and Zyra pressed her forehead against his. The connection that formed was unlike anything before, not just communication but communion. Their minds linked, consciousness flowing between human and alien, creating a neural pattern so intense and unfamiliar that it might confuse the hunter. The intimacy of the moment transcended physical boundaries. Ethan felt Zyra's existence merging with his own, her memories, emotions, the very essence of her being flowing into him as his flowed into her. In that moment, they were neither human nor alien, but something new. The predator rounded the corner, sensor array focused on their hiding place. Ethan and Zyra stood together, hands and minds linked, projecting their combined consciousness like a beacon. The creature halted, its sensory array fluctuating wildly, unable to process the unfamiliar pattern. It backed away, confusion overriding hunting instinct. Taking advantage of its disorientation, they slipped past, racing toward the mountains now looming closer. Behind them, the predator recovered and resumed pursuit, but slower, more cautious. As dusk fell, they reached the foothills, the creature still following but maintaining distance. Ahead, Zyra indicated a narrow crevice leading upward, the path to safety. That night, sheltered in a shallow cave, their newfound intimacy took physical form. What began as necessary contact for communication evolved into exploration, comfort, and eventually passion. Two beings from different worlds finding connection in the most primal way possible, skin against skin, breath mingling, bodies communicating what words never could. In the aftermath, as Zyra's bioluminescence cast soft light across their intertwined forms, Ethan realized their bond had become more than survival. Something profound had formed between them, unspoken but undeniable. Outside, the predator waited. The mountain shelter lay one day's journey ahead. And the planet continued its inexorable collapse. Dawn broke with violent tremors that shook the mountain beneath them. Ethan awoke disoriented, instinctively reaching for Zyra. Her skin glowed faintly in the dim light, tendrils moving gently as she studied ancient markings on the cave wall. Their night together had changed everything, the barriers between their species dissolving in ways neither had anticipated. The intimacy they'd shared had strengthened their neural connection. Now Ethan could sense impressions from Zyra even without direct contact. She turned as he approached, her silver eyes conveying concern. When her palm pressed against his chest, the message was clear: the planet's death throes were accelerating. They needed to reach the research outpost immediately. Outside, the landscape had transformed again. Entire sections of the valley they'd crossed yesterday had collapsed into newly formed chasms. The predator was nowhere in sight, but Ethan's scanner detected movement below, multiple signatures converging on their position. "More hunters," he said grimly. Zyra's touch confirmed his fear: the creature they'd encountered wasn't solitary. Its kind hunted in packs when prey proved challenging. Their unique neural signature had attracted the entire hunting group. They ascended quickly, following a narrow path along the mountainside. Ethan's exosuit had been discarded, the filters depleted, and Zyra's respiratory treatment proving more effective. The physical freedom allowed him to move faster, though his lungs still burned with each breath of the toxic air. By midday, they reached a plateau where the path widened. Ahead stood a structure unlike anything Ethan had seen, built into the mountain itself. Its material seemed to shift and pulse with the same bioluminescence as Zyra's skin. The research outpost. Inside, remnants of Zyra's expedition remained, equipment partially dismantled, supplies scattered. Zyra moved quickly to a central console, her fingers dancing across surfaces that responded to her touch. Images appeared, projected into the air, data, recordings, the final moments of her colleagues. The revelation came not through words but through the shared consciousness that had developed between them. The planet wasn't dying naturally, it was being harvested. The predators weren't native species but biological weapons, designed to eliminate witnesses. Zyra's people had discovered the truth too late. Their ability to communicate through touch had allowed them to connect with the planet itself, to feel its pain as powerful entities from beyond their known space extracted the world's core energy. They'd sent warnings, tried to interfere. For that, they were hunted to extinction. All except Zyra. "Your distress signal," Ethan said, understanding flooding him. "It wasn't just for rescue. You were continuing their mission, trying to alert others." Her hands framed his face, confirming his realization. The connection between them deepened, not just between human and alien now, but between Ethan and the dying world itself. Through Zyra, he could sense the planet's pain, the wrongness of its accelerated death. A sudden alert from the outpost systems interrupted them. Multiple predators had reached the base of the mountain. The hunters were converging, climbing toward them with single-minded purpose. Zyra guided Ethan to what appeared to be a communication array. Her intentions flowed into his mind. If they combined the array's power with his emergency beacon, they might reach his people. But amplifying the signal would also attract every predator on the planet. Their choices were stark: remain silent and die when the planet collapsed, or call for rescue and face the hunters in one final stand. As they worked to integrate their technologies, their movements synchronized perfectly, human ingenuity melding with Zyra's intuitive understanding of her people's devices. The connection between them had become so profound that Ethan could anticipate her needs before she expressed them. When their fingers intertwined across the completed apparatus, the shared emotion needed no translation. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Outside, the predators' howls echoed up the mountainside, growing closer. The signal activated, pulsing outward into space, carrying both Ethan's coordinates and the truth about the planet's destruction. Their message to the stars, and their challenge to the hunters below. Night fell, and with it came the certainty of what dawn would bring, the final confrontation. First light revealed their enemy. A dozen predators surrounded the outpost, their segmented bodies forming a living perimeter, sensor arrays pulsing in unison. At their center stood the largest, the Alpha that had tracked them from the beginning, its exoskeleton scarred from Ethan's pulse blasts. Inside, Ethan and Zyra made final preparations. The signal had been sent, but response would take time, if it came at all. The outpost's defenses were minimal, designed for environmental protection rather than combat. "We need to hold out for 12 hours, Ethan said, studying his scanner. "That's when my ship's emergency protocols will guide any rescue to our coordinates." Zyra's hands moved across the outpost's control surfaces, activating dormant systems. Her touch conveyed determination but also something deeper. A plan formed during the night as Ethan slept. The outpost contained one last secret, a neural amplifier designed for long-distance communication between her people. If adapted, it could project their combined consciousness, the unique pattern that had confused the predator before, magnified 100-fold. The risk was immense. Such projection might overload their nervous systems, particularly Ethan's human physiology. Death or permanent neural damage were likely outcomes. But if successful, it could disorient the entire hunting pack long enough for rescue to arrive. The first attack came as the sun climbed higher, 3 predators scaling the walls while others maintained the perimeter. Ethan fired his pulse pistol through defensive ports, driving them back temporarily. The outpost shuddered with each impact of their massive claws. "They're testing our defenses," Ethan said, conserving his weapon's limited charge. "The real assault will come soon." Zyra completed the neural amplifier's modifications, her skin pulsing with urgency. When she turned to Ethan, her silver eyes held a question, a choice. He understood immediately. The amplifier required both of them, their unique connection the key to its effectiveness. But only one needed to remain connected to maintain the projection once initiated. One could potentially escape. Zyra was offering him that chance. Ethan moved to her, taking her hands in his. "Together," he said simply. The word unnecessary but spoken aloud as confirmation of what his touch conveyed, he wouldn't leave her. Whatever awaited them, they would face it as one. The second attack was coordinated and devastating. Predators struck from multiple angles, their claws tearing through the outpost's outer barriers. The structure groaned under the assault, sections beginning to collapse. They retreated to the central chamber where the amplifier waited. Outside, the alpha predator howled, sensing imminent victory. Zyra positioned Ethan beside her at the amplifier, her bioluminescence intensifying as her hands framed his face. Their foreheads touched, and the connection between them opened completely, no barriers, no secrets, 2 beings becoming one consciousness. Through her, Ethan felt the dying planet's final moments approaching. Through him, Zyra experienced the depth of human emotion, the capacity for hope against impossible odds. As the predators breached the final barriers, they activated the amplifier. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. Their combined consciousness exploded outward, magnified beyond anything they'd experienced. Every memory, emotion, and sensation they'd ever known merged and projected in a psychic shockwave that engulfed the mountain. Outside, the predators convulsed, sensor arrays overloaded by the unfathomable pattern. The Alpha staggered, its biological systems failing as it tried to process the impossible input. Inside, Ethan and Zyra clung to each other, bodies trembling as the amplifier drained their neural energy. Through their shared consciousness, they experienced the boundaries between them dissolving completely, no longer human and alien but something transcendent, existing beyond physical form. In that moment of perfect union, they sensed a new presence, ships entering the atmosphere, drawn by their emergency signal. Rescue approaching. The amplifier reached critical capacity. Warnings flashed across its surface, but they were beyond seeing, lost in their shared consciousness as neural pathways began to burn out. The last predator fell as the first rescue ship landed. Emergency crews breached the outpost to find them still connected to the amplifier, hands clasped, foreheads touching, alive but changed, their neural patterns permanently altered, irrevocably linked. In the medical bay of the rescue vessel, as the dying planet collapsed behind them, Ethan and Zyra awakened simultaneously. No words were needed. No touch required. The bond formed in crisis had evolved into something science couldn't explain, 2 separate beings and now eternally connected, their unspoken alliance becoming an enduring communion that would challenge humanity's understanding of consciousness itself. Their eyes met across the medical chamber, silver to brown, and a single thought passed between them, together.